That kind of garbage appeals to me. I adore it. Come talk about the new Dirty Jobs season with me in the studio right now. Well, I've encountered a lot offstated. No, I'd prefer not to do that. However, my sole responsibility on that show is to attempt, correct? Therefore, if I made any wise decisions throughout this chaotic situation just minutes before, breaking notifications flashed on social media feeds and TV screens. The man, Mike Rowe, introduced America to the value of hard work, recently made a shocking remark. For 20 years, Mickey has guided audiences through the dirtiest jobs and served as the face and voice of integrity, perseverance, and common sense, the most difficult realities. However, the subject today is not about sewers or coal miners, inspectors. It concerns Mike specifically. Rowe, who is 62, is at a crossroads dealing with news that have shocked both critics and admirers. A man who has always praised America's backbone finds himself thrust into the center of a very private revelation. Just a minute ago, he made an admission that could change the way we consider not just his professional background but also the cause he has dedicated his life to life. In order to comprehend today's breaking news about Mike Rowe, you must return to Baltimore, Maryland, the starting point of his story. Long before the world recognized Mike as the tough presenter of Dirty Jobs, although he was just a young child with a passion for acting and storytelling, television was not his first love. Actually, his early interests were completely different from getting into oil rigs or crawling through sewers. As a youngster, he was largely in speech, music, and drama, where his innate charm and profound baritone voice initially developed. Mike frequently gives thanks to his grandfather, a talented his biggest motivation was a tradesman. His granddad had the ability to construct or repair almost anything, and young Mike respected his quiet dignity as much as his work ethic. Mike saw his grandfather as the superhero or movie star that many kids dreamed about, the ideal example. That appreciation for manual labor ingrained in his career will subsequently be motivated by his early years. However, Mike's route to stardom wasn't conventional at all. Following Towson University graduation after earning a degree in communication studies, he focused on performing and working with his voice. Not many people are aware that prior to ever entering the sets of Dirty Jobs, Mike was an opera vocalist by training. He used his wealth to perform with the Baltimore Opera, voice that didn't seem to belong in dirty trenches but rather in music halls. However, in spite of his artistic achievements, he was drawn to something else. Something that enabled him to establish amazing connections with regular people. His television career started with narrative and commercial work. His powerful voice was soon used for advertisements everywhere, contributing authority to innumerable shows, narrating documentaries, and producing goods. His characteristic was that booming, reliable sound. However, the real turning moment was when Mike was hired as a host on the home shopping network QVC. Even though it didn't look glamorous, the position sharpened his improvisational skills and quick wit. Selling arbitrary learned the ability of captivating an audience on any topic by selling devices to sleep-deprived shoppers. After that, Mika created a resume that featured hosting, narration jobs, and vacation programs, chances. However, beneath the slick performance and charisma on camera, he maintained a strong bond with his Baltimore heritage, his admiration for hard workers, and his passion for storytelling. That was important. Producers on the Discovery Channel would soon take notice of this genuineness, who were looking for someone to host a television program that was different from others, a program on America's most hazardous, filthy, and underappreciated occupations. Mike didn't simply fit the description, he broke it. He didn't approach these way many TV personalities do, employees as an impartial observer. Rather, he pulled his sleeves up and accompanied them on their exhausting chores. If it was whether cleaning shark tanks, plunging into sewage pipelines, or castrating lambs, Mike welcomed the grit with humility, humor, and sincere interest. Dirty Jobs had evolved from a humorous documentary series by the early 2000s. It was a phenomenon that is cultural. The central figure in all of this was Mike Rowe, the Baltimore child who grew up to share the labor force's tale in America. This trip from opera houses to oil rigs, from QVC to America's muddy back roads, which contribute to today's headline that has such significance. More than just a TV host, Mike has always been. He has been a link between the realms of actual employment and entertainment. Additionally, as his tale takes a startling turn today, Fans are compelled to revisit Baltimore, the starting point, with a youngster who had lofty goals but never lost sight of the importance of perseverance. Anybody could have imagined that when Dirty Jobs debuted in 2003, it would turn into one of the most significant programs of its era. The idea seemed straightforward on paper. A host would journey through America's roughest, dirtiest, and most underappreciated occupations. However, when something spectacular happened, and Rowe became that host. He didn't simply take a back seat and tell. He threw himself into every work, getting muddy as he went, sweat, dirt, and worse. The audience was immediately enthralled, not only by the startling tasks in and of themselves, but by Mike's readiness to perform them with levity, modesty, and regard for those who living that life on a daily basis. It was evident from the first episode that this was not a show about making fun of other people. Rather, it involved flashing acolyte of unheralded heroes. Coal miners, pig farmers, sewer inspectors, crab fishermen, and trash collectors who maintained civilization but were hardly acknowledged. By entering, Mike made them the stars of the performance, their world. He made them respectable in a manner never seen in a television show. For 8 seasons, Mike took viewers on an emotional and educational tour across America. He made people aware of the harsh, backbreaking realities of labor while simultaneously reminding them of its importance. These occupations weren't just filthy. Their jobs were essential. Additionally, without them, the nation would come to a complete stop. In a time when glitzy celebrity culture was prevalent, Dirty Jobs was a welcome change from television. It displayed sincerity, perseverance, and the essence of mankind. The employees Mike encountered weren't actors. They were neighbors, moms, and fathers. And millions of people found resonance in their stories. However, what really made the show Mike himself was unforgettable. His witty repartee transformed even the most repulsive tasks into light-hearted moments. Grotesque imagery was changed by his storytelling, a poetic narrative, and his sincere interest captivated viewers, felt as though they were studying with him. Beyond the grime and peril, Mick always posed the more significant queries. Who performs this work? Why is it important? And what would happen if no one wanted to do it anymore? These weren't only idle ideas. They served as the beating heart of theories. They capitalized on a burgeoning cultural issue. The disappearance of American workers in specialized trades. The program became a rallying cry for the importance of hard work, labor, and Mike became its spokesperson. There was more to Dirty Jobs than amusement. It was a societal critique. It served as a reminder that the country was founded on sweat, grizzled hands, and unsexy work. As the show's ratings skyrocketed, it became a Discovery's most popular shows on the channel, producing spin-offs, specials, and mini reruns. Reruns of Dirty Jobs still motivate younger people today, audiences who were unable to attend its initial run, demonstrating the enduring nature of its message. Mike Rowe was more than just a TV host. He started a movement in culture. For this reason, the breaking headline of today seems so significant, because it's never just about Mike Rowe when he makes headlines. It is about the millions of people who regarded his path through America's worst jobs as a reflection of their own problems. When many people thought Mike Rowe would simply go into television history after the cameras ceased filming filthy jobs, he is fondly remembered for the moment he spent standing knee-deep in sludge. Mike wasn't finished, though. Dirty Jobs had, in many respects, only been the starting. His observations on America's scarcity of trained workers and the pride of those that worked with their hands and the growing disconnect between learning and practical demands stoked a fire within him. He understood that he couldn't just leave. He possessed a mission, and it was far larger than the ratings on TV. In 2008, Mike established the Mike Rowe Works Foundation, a group dedicated to supporting scholarships and advancing skilled trades for anybody who wished to go after them. When high schools promoted college as the sole means of achieving success, Mike stood up and said what few were prepared to acknowledge. America was in dire need of plumbers, mechanics, carpenters, electricians, and welders equally because it required CEOs, doctors, or attorneys. He maintained that honor could not be found in the letters that follow your name, but in the work that you do. Regarding Mike, this was not a topic of conversation. It was an exhortation. By way of the foundation, scholarships totaling millions of dollars have been awarded, providing innumerable youth with the chance to enter professions that are frequently disregarded by society. Mike made use of his position to showcase the experiences of those who decided to pursue trades, demonstrating how they created happy lives free from the crushing debt from a 4-year program. He gave speeches at universities, appeared before Congress, and authored opinion pieces that questioned the current state of schooling. What he had to say wastes same thing every time. Genuine labor is important because without those who are willing to do it, society cannot endure. In addition to scholarships, Mike resumed his advocacy work in storytelling, this time through Returning the Favor, his well-liked Facebook series in which he traversed the nation, shining a focus on regular people in their communities who are doing exceptional things, like dirty jobs. The program was full of comedy and modesty, but it also had a strong sense of appreciation for common heroes. It turned into another hit, generating millions of views and solidifying Mike's standing as more than simply a personality, but as a voice of morality for Americans who work hard. He also gave a hug, the digital era, starting his podcast, The Way I Heard It, which is a contemporary of the well-known radio stories by Paul Harvey, brief, snappy, and full of surprising contribution. Millions of listeners were introduced to him through these tales, and they appreciated his capacity to discern significance in the forgotten facets of daily life and history. However, in spite of his increasing, Mike maintained his footing despite his influence in many different fields. He refused to be confined to politics, not wanting to associate with any one party or philosophy. Rather, he promoted what he referred to as common sense fixes, frequently condemning both political parties for ignoring the workers who kept the nation functioning. His was a welcome change because of his readiness to talk honestly without worrying about offending anyone, voice in a world where spin rules. This all clarifies why today's news bears a great deal of weight. Since Mike Rowe is more than just a TV personality, he's an supporter, educator, narrator, and, in the eyes of millions, a contemporary American working philosopher. His every headline reverberates far beyond cable networks or Hollywood. It resonates in workshops, classrooms, factories, and farms all around the country. As time passed, Mike Rowe's function American culture changed. He was more than simply the dirty jobs character. He had developed into something more, a paradoxical thinker, a rational voice in a nation that is becoming more and more divided. While media outlets and politicians quarreled working across ideological boundaries, Mike created an environment where truthfulness, common sense, and humility were still important. He didn't do this by talks that used straightforward, approachable stories instead than jargon. His Facebook page, millions of people shared these posts, which became legendary for their wit, lucidity, and the capacity to break through the cacophony. He would use commonplace situations, repairing a damaged toilet, looking at a nest of birds, recalling a lesson from his grandfather, and transform them into contemplations of the most significant issues: effort, accountability, thankfulness, and what success means. Mike talked in contrast to the never-ending talking heads that dominated cable news, neighbor over the fence. His approach wasn't one of kindling ire or separation. Reminding people of common ideals that had subtly deteriorated was the gold dot in contemporary life. He exhorted people to see the humanity in one another despite labels, others, and to always remember the honor of labor. He became, for many, their remedy for the tumultuous political discourse. However, his reluctance to completely support any party or cause also motive is a target. When he spoke personal responsibility, some people said he was being overly conservative. When he chastised firms for ignoring workers, some accused him of being overly liberal. However, Mike hardly ever faltered. He refused to acknowledge the political affiliation of common sense. To allow commentators to push him into a corner. The Way I Heard It, his podcast, goes further solidified this reputation. In each episode, he provided brief but impactful tales that usually left listeners thinking long after the credits had rolled, full of surprises and insights. It wasn't politics. It was a story of humanity that transcended background and dogma. The same rich voice that used to describe crab fishermen navigating frigid seas was now helping viewers navigate the turbulence of contemporary life. Mike's capacity to heal divisions turned into significantly more important in times of national emergency, when joblessness flourished as industries fell, and as the pandemic changed the way that America. Mike was present to remind everyone that the frontline workers, the trucks, the nurses, the farmers were the real backbone of the nation. They were electricians. His articles, and because the interviews were based on genuineness rather than ambition, they were taken seriously during that time. Individuals trust him because he deserved it, not because he was well known, dragging trash, killing animals, and scuttling through sewers together actual employees. He was distinct because of his credibility. And it is the reason that his words today have an impact that extends well beyond the television sector. He established himself as a trustworthy character rather than one of glitz or fame. And in an era where confidence in authorities, the media, and institutions has diminished drastically high levels, Mike Rowe became one of the few voices that people still trusted. That's precisely why his announcement from a few minutes ago has been so devastating, because America pays attention to what Mike Rowe has to say. Not out of duty, but because they are aware that, despite the discomfort, he has always spoken the truth. Despite all of his accomplishments and impact, Mike Rowe has had difficulties in his life. Actually, behind the serene fan's favorite voice of reason, there have been rumors of hardships, failures, and unexpected turns that formed the modern-day man. Although fame provided him with a platform, it also put him under continual observation. Every statement, every viewpoint, and every critic's anxious to expose any weaknesses in his reputation have analyzed his personal choice. Mike has consistently carried despite his modesty. He has acknowledged that the pressure of expectations can be draining. Over the years, there have been speculations regarding his health, queries over whether he was physically exhausted from his innumerable initiatives and the hard effort of dirty jobs, scratching through handling hazardous equipment, exposing himself to poisonous sewers. And there were repercussions when dangerous conditions were used for television entertainment. He has been candid about his back trouble, persistent aches, and fatigue that came after exhausting filming days. But he didn't often complain, deciding instead to draw attention to the much heavier physical loads that the employees he observed were carrying. Beyond the tangible, Mike also had to deal with the unseen stress of being a public figure. His frank, even though so many people valued honesty, it occasionally caused conflict. A single Facebook post has the potential to spark heated debates among both sides, modifying his statements to suit their own purposes. For a man who took great satisfaction in it, was annoying to watch his message get sucked into party disputes. As someone who is not involved in politics, then there were the monetary difficulties. Many people believed that having a successful television career would bring them infinite wealth, but frequently, Mike reminded people that his wealth was not nearly as large as the tabloids said. He spilled a lot of his earnings, often at personal expense, into his advocacy activities and foundation. In contrast to celebrities who constricted, Mike frequently declined offers that didn't feel true to his objective because he thrives on endorsements. His money was not as important as reputation. However, there were moments when that honesty required sacrifice. He also hardly ever talked about his personal troubles. His choice to live a more personal existence, staying away from marriage and having kids, sparked inquiries in gossip columns and interviews. Mike, who is always quick to laugh, frequently evaded, claiming that his job had become his family or that he was too busy. However, according to close friends, he occasionally felt lonely while being selected. It wasn't precisely loneliness, but rather a feeling of seclusion resulting from bearing a great deal of responsibility himself. However, for each rumor of adversity, Mike always managed to catch people off guard. As soon as fans thought might take a break from the limelight, but he came back with a new endeavor, a new viewpoint, or a surprising tale. Whether initiating, reciprocating, increasing his podcast's reach, or broadening his foundation, Mike consistently changed who he was. He proved that he wasn't the only one with resilience, something he lived himself, but something others admired. And for that reason, the news it feels so heavy to break today. Since the world has long conjectured, Mike Rowe has finally made a public admission about his private troubles that few anticipated. A reality that clarifies whispers about his future, dispels years of misinformation, and establishes setting the groundwork for what might be his career's most dramatic phase. Then it took place. Only a few minutes ago, Mike Rowe made an announcement that sent shockwaves across the industry, shook colleagues, and astonished fans. In a well-crafted, beautiful, and emotional declaration, he disclosed that he would be leaving behind a large portion of his public work in order to address issues that could not hide any longer. For many years, there has been conjecture over his health, the consequences of his unrelenting schedule, and his future. Today, few dared to speak, but Mike verified what many had feared. The toil of decades spent thus caught up with him after being exposed to dangerous situations and ongoing stress. Mike said that doctors had firmly recommended him to slow down and prioritize. But he did not elaborate his health over his unrelenting quest. For a man who climbed through sewage and coal dust all his life, it was shocking to hear him acknowledge his weakness while grinning, but health wasn't the only factor. Additionally, Mike recognized the psychological toll of bearing the burden of lobbying by itself for an extended period of time. He discussed the strain of having to always provide for others' wisdom, to consistently represent reason in a world that is becoming more and more irrational. He said that he had frequently felt as though he was yelling into thin air, attempting to remind the nation of its spine while seeing organizations continue to disregard the knowledgeable employees he battled so hard to honor. Millions of admirers were silenced when he disclosed that the future of Mike Rowe's cherished foundation would be evolving. As it will not vanish, he clarified, adding that others will take over as leaders, enabling him to take a back seat and concentrate on his private life. For a campaign that had changed the discourse on labor in America and provided funding for many scholarships, this shift signaled the end of a period. Instead of being presented as a farewell, the announcement was an avoidable change. Mike assured him that maybe his voice would still be heard, either in smaller amounts, through his podcast, or through sporadic endeavors. However, he was truthful. He couldn't go on in the same manner and at the same speed without putting his future and health at risk. It was a bittersweet acknowledgement of restriction and a proclamation of survival. Fans were in disbelief. Many had observed Mike is unbreakable, impervious to the demands of celebrity and the perils of work. Hearing him acknowledge his humanity, frailty, and need for rest, its candor was startling. But in typical Mike Rowe manner, he concluded with a joke. As he had always stated, dirty jobs are a love letter to work, not to me. He reminded everyone. The work would continue, America's backbone wouldn't just fall apart, and the workers would persevere, since one man took a step back. However, the truth was evident. Notwithstanding that humor, Mike Rowe started a new chapter today, one in which he at last prioritized himself. The responsive reaction to Mike Rowe's announcement was swift and powerful. Minutes after his announcement, a flood of emotion erupted on social media channels. Supporters who had been with him since Dirty Job's inception expressed sadness, thankfulness, and incredulity. Mike had been more than just a TV host to many. He had served as a distant mentor, a voice that elevated their personal hardships. Drivers of trucks wrote about during his podcast about lengthy drives and how his comments provided companionship through nights of loneliness. Farmers, mechanics, welders, and electricians all shared recollections of proudly describing filthy jobs while watching them with their kids. Dad takes care of them like that. Not all Mike was on television. He demonstrated the importance of their effort. The former Dirty Jobs cast members and former employees also contributed, sharing old pictures and narrating behind-the-scenes tales, and expressing gratitude to Mike for showcasing their efforts. As one Alaskan crab fisherman put it, "Without Mike, nobody would have ever recognized the struggles we face here. I'll never forget how he made America care. Forget it, the business was likewise rocked." Executives in television had questioned the viability of a show about garbage guys and sewage pipelines acknowledged that Mike had forever altered the storytelling rules. His distinct combination of humility, humor, and authenticity was now considered the gold standard, which is nearly impossible to duplicate. Producers discussed how Mike's departure signaled the end of a period in viewers were enthralled by reality television, which featured actual work rather than dramatized scenes. Labor activists and academics also commented, pointing out the cultural gap his loss will create. Mike Rowe wasn't a columnist remarked, just a TV host. He was the blue-collar philosopher of America. People trusted him because he had a stronger voice than most politicians, ways that they no longer have faith in authorities. However, not every response was heartfelt. His resignation, according to some detractors, revealed a more serious issue: the country's continued disregard for qualifications. One commenter stated, "If Mike Rowe can't keep this fight going, then perhaps we should all get up and replace him. The disparity in skills isn't going away, and it gets worse when he loses his voice." Even the financial community paid attention. Businesses that had collaborated with Mike on advocacy efforts hurried to undermine the potential impact of his diminished presence on their own outreach organizations that had used his celebrity to promote workforce development and scholarships and counter fresh uncertainty. In the meantime, regular Americans kept pour support onto his platforms. Encouragement messages flooded in. "Mike, look after yourself. We've had enough of your care. We'll keep the torch with you. The path is already illuminated by you. Actors were joined by celebrities. He was praised by musicians and other hosts as one of the most genuine people to never show up on TV. For a guy who has dedicated his professional life to uplifting others, it was poetic and appropriate to watch millions of people now rush to support him. Nevertheless, one question lurked beneath the appreciation and acclaim. What follows? As the shock of today's announcement fades, one thing is certain: Mike Rowe has already cemented his legacy in the United States. His legacy isn't limited to a foundation or a television show. It inhabits the millions of lives he impacted, the innumerable employees he honored, and the discussions he inspired by the importance of genuine work. The cameras ceased to roll long after that. Mike's voice will continue to reverberate in classrooms as educators play videos of filthy jobs to remind pupils that every career is valuable. Apprentices will hear it reverberating in their workshops, instruments that bear his name and are motivated by scholarships. It will reverberate within households. Many relatives recall congregating in front of the television to watch him scuttle through filth, smiling, demonstrating that even in the dirtiest situations, respect and amusement can coexist, several facets of civilization. His withdrawal from the lead does not mean that it is over, a passing of the torch, however. Mike bore the responsibility of being the only well-known supporter of skilled trades in America. His absence no pushes parents, legislators, educators, and employees themselves to take up and carry on the battle he initiated. This may be his best work in many ways, contribution, making the country understand that one man cannot bear just this mission. However, even as he retreats, Mike has pledged to not vanish. He'll probably keep doing his podcast. His sporadic thoughts will continue to appear, and his comedy will undoubtedly become widely known, square, but the chaos, the never-ending strain, the demands, those days are over. And maybe that's the last lesson Mike Rowe has to teach. That even the most resilient people need to understand when to take breaks, when to pay attention to their own bodies, and when to have faith in their work has been sufficient. The absence of his everyday presence may be lamented by fans, but they will continue to spread his message since it has already ingrained itself in them. He demonstrated to the country that hard work is not a sign of shame and that dirty tasks are no out of date. And grit, not beauty, is the source of that dignity. For many years, he exposed the secret labor force in America, and as a result, he became among his generation's most trusted individuals. As he embarks on a more subdued phase, Mike Rowe's legacy lives on. A heritage of integrity, wit, fortitude, and above all, reverence for those who keep the world going, one filthy task at a time.